Hello, and welcome to the 183rd episode of Gaming Talk. On this episode, I'm going to be discussing and giving my thoughts on Resident Evil Revelations 2. Let's get into it. Revelations 2 is quite a lot different from Revelations 1, in that it's a surprise to me that it's even a numbered sequel, but it somehow is. Sure, you do have a partner in Revelations 1, but they're always computer controlled with some exceptions where you play specifically as that character. Revelations 2 decides to shake up the single player by telling the story between two pairings of characters. You've got Claire and Moira doing stuff in the past, and you have Barry and Natalia doing stuff about 6 months and after the stuff with Claire and Moira goes down. The thing is that you can and will be swapping between characters in each pairing while playing, and that is because one character will do something that the other character can't do, but each pairing is kind of the same anyway. Claire and Barry are the shoot first, ask questions later people, while Moira and Natalia are more or less for finding hidden stuff in levels. The only real difference is that Moira is on flashlight duty for Claire while Barry has that covered in that side, and that's because Natalia can see hidden enemies for Barry, and yes, there are invisible enemies in the game. Now, the levels for the story are structured where you play as Claire and Moira first, followed by Barry and Natalia second, and that's because they will usually go through the same sections in a given chapter. That is another thing that is significantly different between Revelations 1 and 2 is that Revelations 1 has 12 chapters, whereas Revelations 2 has 4, although you could argue 6 if you count the 2 extra chapters. Still, Revelations 2 has about half the fewer chapters than Revelations 1, and I'm not sure if I like that, honestly. As it is a Resident Evil game, there are some puzzles in the game, and to me, some of them are kind of annoying. For example, in Chapter 3, as Claire and Moira, there's a room you go into that requires you use Moira's flashlight to see a specific path to walk, and if you make one wrong move, lasers will kill you, and they are trained on you the entire time you are walking, making the stress just that much higher. For me, definitely the most annoying part of the whole game, not to mention, like I said, they're trained on you, so they're gonna fry your ass as soon as you mess up. The other one for me was in Barry and Natalia's Chapter 4, when you cross the crane. That one took me a bit because I didn't realize that if the platform is docked at like section 1 and you pull the lever, it sends it across to the other side of section 1. But once I figured that out, the rest of it came pretty easily. Again, this is probably just a me thing, as I don't do well with puzzles in games unless they're incredibly obvious or something that I have done 100 times, like Portal or Portal 2. There's a pretty decent weapon selection, though I find that you see more of it in the raid mode than the story mode. There are handguns, revolvers, semi-auto shotguns, double-barrel shotguns, pump-action shotguns, machine pistols, submachine guns, assault rifles, sniper rifles, and an RPG. There's a decent selection of throwables too. There's an ice bomb, fire bomb, smoke bomb, exploding bottles, and decoy bottles. There's also a knife that you can use as well. It's a pretty good selection of weapons, and they all feel pretty darn good to use too. Though there is something a little strange I noticed when it comes to the weapons, is that in the raid mode, some weapons, typically assault rifles, have a pretty decent amount of recoil that they don't have in the story mode, and I don't think that makes a lot of sense to me, but it's just something I noticed. Now, I don't want to get deep into the story, but I do want to tell you that the game does have 2 endings, and only the good ending is the actual canon ending to the game. I managed on 2 playthroughs to get the bad ending. And yeah, I don't really care, honestly. Another downside to the game is that there's not much enemy variety. There's only like 4 to 5 enemy types in the whole game, and that's kind of it. None of the enemy types from Revelations 1 make any sort of comeback either, which I guess is fine. But that would have been pretty neat if they had done that. To be honest, there's not really many, if any, connections to Revelations 1, which is a little odd for the game being a numbered sequel that shares the same title. Apparently, Revelations 2 is supposed to be right smack in the middle of Resident Evil 5 and 6, which is interesting for reasons I'm about to get into. Before I give final thoughts, I'm going to talk about the raid mode since I've mentioned it a few times earlier. The raid mode here is very different from how it is in Revelations 1. In that, you just played the 20 missions and tried to get an S rank on all of them to unlock the next difficulty mode to play those same 20 missions again. In Revelations 2, there is a total of 10 gauntlets, each with 5 missions each for a total of 50 missions per difficulty, and there are 3 difficulties. What I find interesting with the missions is that there are some missions that use level layouts from RE6 in them, which I find interesting since the game is supposed to take place between RE5 and 6. Now, there are some differences that I noticed in Revelations 2's raid mode. First is that instead of achieving a letter rank based on the mission, you now get medals, and you want to get 5 medals per mission. There's a medal for completing the mission, 1 for completing the mission under the recommended level, 1 for completing the mission without any healing items, 1 for completing the mission with all enemies killed, and 1 for completing the mission and getting all those previous medals in a single run. It certainly is challenging to do, but it's definitely not impossible to do. Another difference is that you're not really any one specific character here. Rather, you're this kind of weird wireframe person called Cypher. So you go over to a mannequin and you equip a skin that makes you look like another Resident Evil character. Each one levels up individually, which as much as I don't like that, I'm not super opposed to it as it does make sense. If I play as Claire, then it would make sense for only Claire to level up. Last difference I noticed is that in Revelations 1, you cannot equip weapons that was a higher level than your character was. But in Revelations 2, you can do that. I don't know why they changed it, but they did, and I guess that's an okay change. Overall, I don't really have that much negative to say here. There's a few puzzles that annoyed me, and that laser room in Claire's Chapter 3 was really annoying, but other than those few things, everything I have here is fairly positive. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is a good and enjoyable game. And that's going to do it for this episode, so if you like this kind of content, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.